guys. Welcome to this week's episode of Grooves of Influence. My name's Xavier, your host, and this week's guest is Austin. Austin, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure. My name's Austin Long. I play saxophone primarily. I also play a bit of clarinet, flute, piano, various other things.
Nice. So a multi-instrumentalist.
Yeah.
Awesome, man. And so how we start every one of these episodes is I ask you a very difficult question. What is the most influential album to you?
And that's an impossible question, but I tried to compartmentalize it a little bit. So I picked Rage by Lettuce, which Lettuce has been, in general, my most influential group when it comes to, in particular, funk music, which is kind of my favorite style to play, listen to, write, any of that stuff. That's not to say I haven't been influenced by plenty of other things, but Lettuce and in particular, discovering Lettuce for the first time, I feel like was kind of a bit of a turning point for me and my musical journey.
So where were you before you discovered? So I'm assuming this is the first Lettuce album you ever listened to?
Technically, no, it's not, but I feel like it's the one that's had the biggest impact on me. Probably, I don't want to say favorite because I can't pick a favorite. That's just not fair, But it's one that I will definitely listen to anytime, over and over again. I can't listen to it too much. You know what I mean?
Yeah, every song's excellent.
Yeah.
Listening to it track after track, you're like, I can't stop bobbing my head, man, the whole entire time. It's really fun.
Yeah, it's infectious. Yeah.
So before you found Lettuce, kind of what were you doing? What was the music style you were playing mainly?
Yeah, so primarily jazz, and I thought of myself as a jazz musician, strictly almost. Although I did play other styles, but jazz was really my thing. So as far as where I was when I discovered them, I was working on a cruise ship, and I worked on a cruise ship for a few years, and playing jazz. And this was just after I graduated college, and I'd never heard of Lettuce. I mostly just listened to jazz music. And the trumpet player on the ship, who was a great, fantastic trumpet player, I think he mentioned Lettuce or something like that at one point. And I was like, who? What? And he shared a few albums of theirs with me. Because on the cruise ship, you don't have internet or you don't have good internet. So everybody kind of just gives each other music and TV and movies and all this stuff. So you pass around hard drives and just copy what you want. And yeah, it was a great way to discover new stuff because, you get to check out everybody's library, and you couldn't use stuff like Spotify or Apple Music because, internet's almost non-existent. So I checked out Lettuce and I was like, holy cow, this is amazing. Like I didn't know funk could be this good. I wasn't unfamiliar with like 70s funk and stuff, which is a lot of Lettuce's influence, but they just kind of modernize it and take it to a new evolution, add in other influences like hip hop and jazz, of course. And it just felt like this new thing that I just loved. And I started listening to, the first album I actually listened to was Fly, which is the one directly after Rage. But then I checked out all their other ones and, went from there. So I started listening to it all the time, like when I was working out or just in my room doing nothing, And slowly I started to think, man, this is the music I want to play. Like I like jazz and it's cool, but this just speaks to me in a different way,
So what about Rage stood out from the rest of their discography? I mean, they have a lot of amazing albums,
Yeah.
but why this one?
That's a really good question. I feel like it's one thing in particular about it is each track is phenomenal in and of itself. And it's a great showcase of the ways that Lettuce can embody different styles with different influences. Like there's a lot of just straight funk like James Brown or Earth, Wind and Fire, 70s type funk. There's also some hip hop influence stuff on there, which is great. And they lean more into that in their later stuff. There's instrumental tracks, there's vocal tracks, there's originals, there's covers. It's just got such an incredible variety. And it feels like the album just flows so well, even though most of the tracks are somewhat different.
Yeah, that was something I noticed. I mean, there's just a diversity of sound, and it weirdly fits together. You know, I think that funk kind of under everything, there is kind of a heartbeat of funk throughout everything I think they do. So I kind of feel that. I don't know how if you feel kind of a similar experience with the music.
Yeah, totally. I think one of the things that makes it feel so good is everything is a melody. Like the bass line's a melody. You know, the guitar part's a melody. The horns are playing melodies. You know, nothing is not melodic. Everything is its own thing, but it also fits into the groove and just complements each other. It's each part is minimalistic. Like nothing is overplayed. You know, it's just the right amount to feel good and just lift everything else up in the track. So I think that's one of the things that's unique about funk in general is just how melodic and simple it is, but it feels so good.
Yeah, that was one of the notes I wrote down. I was listening to it. I was like, this album is so repetitive, but it's not boring.
Right, exactly.
No, I was like, I don't know how you can kind of have those two. It feels like a juxtaposition in a way. Like you shouldn't be able to play the same thing over and over again, but every time you hear it, you're like, I like what I'm hearing. Yeah. I think a song that really has that is Relax. Like that song is probably one of the most actual like repetitive because like there's no solos or anything in it, but the timing of those horns, I think it's horns. I don't even know what instrument it is. I was listening to it. I'd play it back a couple times. I was like, is that horns? Is that like, it's like, I think a couple instruments synced up together, right?
Yeah. You're talking about the ones with the heavy effects.
Yeah. Maybe that's what it is. It's just like really heavy effects on these horns, but like the timing is like so weird, but it's still in time. Like they're playing on that back end of every single note, but then mixing in some other stuff. I was like, oh, that's interesting. That really stands out in the sense of like, they aren't even playing different notes. It's the same note. Like it's not even like a ton of notes going up and down or anything like that. It's just the rhythm is so interesting that you can have a single note or a couple handful of notes make a really complex sounding
totally
sound.
And there's subtleties in it too. Like listening to it, you know, over and over again, you can start to feel like it will slowly build or it will start to, you know, just kind of shift and flex as they play it. So like you said, it's the same thing over and over again, but it's actually not because there's so many, there's little layers and little just intricacies that you don't necessarily notice the first time you listen to it or pick up unless you're consciously thinking about it.
And it's not things you see on the piece of paper when you're playing music. It's not on the sheet paper. It's a feel thing. And like I was listening to a couple of these songs and I like hear these like sometimes I was hearing like these like little bells or some sort of percussion and I was like, I swear he probably just added that in. I was like, there like it doesn't feel like, you know, it was something written because it just like comes out of nowhere. I was like, dude, that guy was just like feeling like this could fit perfectly right here.
Totally, yeah.
Something like that. So for the album, are there some standout tracks that you kind of go back to? Is it everything? Like kind of how do you listen to this album?
In general, I do like to listen to it just all the way through. Sometimes I will put the album on shuffle, but still listen to the whole thing. You know, some of my favorites on that album, you know, let me pull up a track list so I make sure I don't forget any. But I know for sure By Any Means Necessary is one of my favorites. I really like the vocals. Any of the songs with vocals on that, Need to Understand. It's a fantastic one. The two covers, Move On Up and Express Yourself. Fantastic. In fact, Express Yourself, that's the first version of that song I heard. I didn't realize it was a cover at the time, but it's such a fantastic version of that song. Yeah. So by Any Means Necessary is one of my favorites. King of the Bergs. I mean, yeah, just looking at the track list, I would pick all of them as my favorites. They're all just so different and unique and interesting and great.
So I'm just curious about the covers. I think you hit on something that was really interesting that, I don't know, in my listen to it, I definitely heard. It felt like a modernization of these songs. It's like they really pay homage to what it was. Specifically, I was thinking of Move On Up, which I love Curtis Mayfield.
Yeah, me too.
Amazing artist, right? You know, you have to. And it's just like, the way they play it, it feels like it, but it still feels a little different. And I actually, midway listening to it, I was like, I got to go listen to Curtis Mayfield's version and to hear the difference. And it was like, the production's just so clean. It's kind of like cool to get like a refreshed version of a song, you know, because it was recorded 50 years ago. It's wonderful in and of itself, but to kind of get something new is really cool, but that's still fresh almost.
Right. They do such a good job of keeping the spirit, and there's really not even that much different about it. Like you said, it basically just feels like an updated version, which is cool. I have mixed feelings about covers a lot of the time because unless there's something different or unique about it, it's like, why wouldn't you just go listen to the original? You know what I mean? There's got to be something that makes it, gives you a reason to listen to it beyond just, well, I could just go play the original. And I think these are great for that. They're slightly different, but still, you know, basically the same, just updated and still have that great feel to them.
Yeah, sometimes you hear covers and people are like doing too much and you're like, I love the original.
But I think Curtis Mayfield in particular, that, you know, it's good that you mentioned that, because I feel like is probably one of Lettuce's biggest influences, just with the horns and the vocals and the funk groove that he used all the time, and any of his stuff, very similar to Lettuce.
Mm-hmm. I would say, yeah. I mean, it sounds like they could have came out of the 70s. So definitely the funk that they have. I mean, the feel, they definitely have a really, really impressive funk feel. Like, it's just, like you said before, it's infectious. Mm-hmm. And so you mentioned also By Any Means Necessary. Yeah. So what about that song do you like? What stands out to you?
Well, it's the only track on there that uses that talk box sound, which I love. It's one of my favorite sounds in funk. And yeah, it's another one of those where it's super repetitive. It's layering of different simple melodies and grooves, fantastic horn parts. I don't even know, might be a short solo, but you know, the solo is not the focus. Mm-hmm. That's another thing that's great about Lettuce is, you know, I've seen them live like 3 or 4 times, and they're a bit different live. Like, they'll stretch out songs. They'll do different stuff that's not on the albums at all. Totally new sections, interludes, long solos. But then when you go to the album, the solos are short and sweet. They're very melodic. There's nothing that doesn't contribute to the groove. And, you know, coming from a jazz background, that when I first listened to them, I was like, the solos are not what I'm used to. You know, they're not technically impressive. They're not like virtuosic, you know, but they just feel so good that I was like, man, I want to play like that. Like, up to that point, it had been like, you know, the more notes that you can play, the more complicated rhythms, then, you know, that's what makes a good solo, but it's really not. It's how good does it feel? So I think that listening to like in particular, that Any Means Necessary, the feel is the important thing. How does it feel overall? And, you know, your ability on the instrument, your technical ability isn't necessarily the important part. It's how do you come across with the feel that you want? So that was a huge influence to me.
Yeah, in that song particularly, when I was listening to it, there's a part that stands out. It's like a guitar player. And so one of them is like playing this really simple, like little melody outside of the band. And like you got the whole band playing like the same thing. And so it feels almost like a wall of sound. Like you're just like, oh, you know, like that sound is from the band is kind of overwhelming. And then it stops. And then you just get this little guitar by himself. And then they kind of like talking back and forth.
Oh, yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yep. Yeah.
And it's super cool. I was like, and then it goes into that super layered part, like the rest of the song is like this super layered groove. And like you're saying, each part, if you were to probably listen to it individually, it's not very complex. But when you layer them all together, you're like, this sounds crazy, you know? So it's really cool. And I feel like it was the type of song where every time you listen to it, you're going to hear something new.
Mm-hmm. Pick out some new little part. Yeah.
Very much so. And so seeing them live, has that influenced how you play live or kind of how you want to play live?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, like I was saying, I think the main thing I try to come back to with my playing is like, does it feel good? Obviously, I want to be the best player that I can be, but I think it's really important for artists to think from the audience's perspective. And I know that might be a divisive thing for some musicians. Some musicians might say, screw the audience, I'm going to do what I want. But I feel like it's still important to embrace the groove. And does it feel good? Is it something that people want to listen to? How does it make them feel? Does it make them feel like they want to dance or whatever, So for me as a player, I always want to come back to that. Like, am I playing something that just feels good? Does it service the groove? Does it service the music itself? Or does it serve me personally? There's a place for both, but as a performer, I really want to engage the audience, right? Which means you got to service the music. Does it make people feel a particular way? Super important to me.
Yeah, that's interesting. Going back to your roots of jazz, I mean, what was your mindset when you were playing jazz before you really got into funk? Like, kind of how did you go about performing? Like, what was kind of...
Yeah, jazz is such a different genre, and the way that people approach jazz is so different than a lot of other music, because I think a lot of times jazz it can be kind of pretentious, right? It's more maybe about showing off or playing things that are extremely complex. And even when you go back to like the 40s, when bebop was invented, that was honestly the point of early bebop was, look at what we can play. Look at how complex this is. Look at these harmonies. Look at these rhythms. This is stuff that most people can't do. And so I think I had that mindset a lot coming from jazz. I mean, I fell in love with the complexity of it. It's beautiful in and of itself. But I don't know that it's as accessible when it comes to performance audience. There's definitely an audience for it, but I love the accessibility of funk music. You put that on, like you put on Rage at any party, gathering, get together. I bet you'd have a hard time finding people that wouldn't like it. You know what I mean? So that's what I love about it, is just the broad accessibility of it. It just feels good no matter who you are, what background you have.
Yeah, like I said, when I was listening to it, you just can't help but start moving, bobbing your head a little bit. It's just so infectious. From a technical standpoint, kind of with this album, are there elements that you try to incorporate in your own music? I mean, do you write? Do you compose a little bit?
Yeah, that's a super good question, because Lettuce is really responsible for inspiring me to create the first band that I put together, which was Funky Uncle. A long story short, I was listening to it a bunch, and I thought, you know what, this is what I want to play. I want to put together a group like this. So I texted my friend Kenny, who's a drummer, and he was into Lettuce too. I'm not sure how he got into it, maybe separately from me, or maybe I told him about it. I don't know. But I was like, hey, we should put together a group that plays Lettuce. And at the time, I didn't even think of originals. I was just like, we're just going to play this. We're going to play mostly Lettuce, some other stuff that's like Lettuce, but that's what I want to play. So I started transcribing, writing out as many Lettuce songs as possible. And something interesting that you touched on earlier is the fact that when you write out these songs, they're super simple. And you look at the notes and they're just like, okay. But then trying to play it how they play it is an entirely different thing. And playing it with the same intensity, the same type of groove, the feel, like you mentioned, laying back certain things, in a certain way, changes the notes completely. So I wrote out a bunch of it and tried to put together people that I knew that would be able to play it. But it was such a hard thing to figure out at first. Like, how do you actually play this music? Can't just read the notes. You have to listen to it. There's no other way. It's a tricky thing. It's difficult.
And so did you end up writing your own music kind of inspired from this afterwards? Like after you guys were playing Lettuce songs for a bit, or how did that
Exactly.
happen?
Yeah. We played Lettuce songs for a bit. And then, well, the way that I actually started writing originals was, we had a friend that was going to Spokane Falls Community College, and he wanted to record us as part of a recording project. And he was like, you guys could play covers. That's fine. But we like to try to record original music. And so I was like, oh, maybe I should try to hammer out some originals real fast. So I wrote out like 3 or 4 originals in like 2 weeks, just like deadline pressure. I was like, okay, I got to come up with a few originals for this. And then I kind of started to discover, man, I actually like writing originals. This is fun. When I'm in the right mindset, it kind of flows. So then, yeah, I put together more and more, and it became, closer to 50-50 in terms of originals and covers of what we were playing.
That's awesome. You said in the right mindset to write. What does that mean for you?
Man, if I had a good answer to that question, I would probably be able to write a lot more. But it's tough. It's like sometimes when I try to force it, it just doesn't work. I think a lot of it just depends on how I'm feeling at the time. Like, because it can be, maybe I'm stressed out and it's a nice outlet, something for me to forget everything else and just focus on writing something. Or maybe I'm really relaxed and it flows easier. It's really hard to say. I haven't necessarily figured out a good answer to that. Because sometimes I'm just, bam, able to write something in like 2 hours and I wrote a complete song. But other times I like just bang my head against it for 2 hours and come away with nothing. So it's tough.
Do you typically write like lyrics and composition, or do you just write composition or
instrumental?
So it look like for you.
I've never been great at writing lyrics. That's something I want to try to get better at. But yeah, just instrumental.
So how do you translate the emotions you're feeling into music? Like, how does that work for you?
And that's tough. Well, it just depends. I mean, on how I approach it. Sometimes I'll start with a melody. Like maybe I'll start with my saxophone and play, just mess around in a certain key or in a certain feel and try to think of a melody or whatever comes out. Like if I'm practicing improvisation, that's a good way for melodies to be born, because improvisation should be, in my opinion, it should be melodies that you're playing. So it's a good way to birth melodies. And, that's one where if you're just playing, you're playing however you feel. So what comes out is, how you're feeling. Other times I'll start at the keyboard. I think I start at the keyboard a lot when I write, either a certain chord or a certain chord progression or a bass line oftentimes. And, with funk music, bass lines are so important, and they're the heart of the song, I think, they're the meat. So sometimes coming up with the bass line first is, the way to go about it. Just depends.
Yeah, I love how you mentioned the bass line. That was something that I was like, throughout that album, I was like, this bass player, he's leading this charge of music. Him and that drummer, man, they definitely were able to transform songs. He just took the lead everywhere. I think Mr. Yancey, the last song, very hip hop feel, very much a hip hop feeling song. Definitely shows him taking the lead. And I was like, oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Is that an instrument that you play, or just kind of using synths on the keyboard?
Yeah, no, I'll play bass lines on the keyboard. But I actually would love to learn the bass. That's something I've kicked around for a while, because I love that instrument. It's just, it's very much the heart of a lot of different music genres. So learning to play it, I think, would be wonderful.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, was there anything else on the album that you think somebody like listening to it for a first time should kind of listen for? Like something that you notice as kind of a more experienced musician that can kind of show them something new?
I mean, I would just encourage people to just, feel it, listen to what they like. I guess one of the other things I thought about is the fact that they're so tight together, and yet they're also it feels so loose at times. So that's something that's interesting to think about as you listen to it. The horns in particular, because like as a horn player, especially when I'm playing in a section with other horns, a lot of times the goal is to sound like one instrument or one person playing 3 different horns. You know what I mean? But Lettuce doesn't necessarily do that. They're very individual. Like as you listen to it, you can pick out, I think there's 2 or 3 horns at a time, usually on that album, sometimes 4, but you can pick out individual horns. It doesn't sound like one player necessarily, which is really cool. And it contributes to just the spirit of it. It just feels different individual, yet it all contributes to the groove.
Yeah, that's kind of an interesting part. Definitely probably playing live some of these songs. I'm curious what your experience was doing that, like, because it is such a feel thing. Like, how was that experience playing Lettuce songs live?
Yeah, it's fun. I mean, I love it. And it's got to be with other people that, appreciate it and understand it. And, but it's hard because you just have to, it has to become like second nature, those feels. You're not playing jazz. You're not playing something, you're not playing classical. You're not playing something with a high level of precision. It's got to have the, man, what's the word? Like almost dirty, it's got to sound funky, Yeah,
For sure. And so, for the listeners who want to check out some of the stuff that you're doing, what do you have coming out? Do you have any projects? You performing soon?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the album that I wrote most of with Funky Uncle is called Funkle. Funky Uncle, Funkle. That's on Spotify, Apple Music, whatever. You can check that out. That's very Lettuce inspired. That's basically the main inspiration for that album. And we wrote that and recorded that back in 2019. And then it came out literally right before COVID happened in 2020. So we just barely got it out before COVID, which was really lucky. And then we kind of took a hiatus, and we've come back a bit, but Funky Uncle hasn't done a ton. And honestly, I've been wanting to get it back together. A lot of the members have talked to me multiple times, and I see them and play with them regularly, but they're like, yeah, when are we going to do more Funky Uncle stuff? I'm like, well, I just gotta do it, So maybe this summer I'm thinking I want to try to revive it. But I play in a bunch of other different groups. I play jazz and I play pop and funk and all kinds of stuff. So one of the projects that actually I'm working on right now is with a group called Sugar Bear. So we're actually working on recording an album right now. We've got a good portion of it done, but we're still working on it. It's probably going to take a while. It's one of those things that always takes longer than you think. But so Sugar Bear is definitely one to check out. We perform pretty regularly at Zola and various places. I think we're going to be at the Chameleon coming up in February. Let's see. Jason Perry Band is another great group that I play with pretty regularly. Jason Perry is a fantastic funk musician, guitar player, singer. I play with him a lot, so he's one to check out for sure, especially if you're into jam type funk, like more extended jams and stuff like that. See, I play jazz too. So I play with a group called Zonky Jazz, which is like early swing, sort of like big band type swing jazz. We do swing dance lessons and stuff. That's a really fun group. And then another somewhat similar group called Red Hot Kitten Stompers. And we play what you would used to call Dixieland, but I don't think you call it that anymore. Trad jazz. That's a super fun group. There's no drums in it. It's just horns, guitar, and bass. And it's still somewhat danceable, even though it's like early jazz. It's not funk at all, but it's still pretty fun. I really enjoy that. It's very improv based, and it's like every time we play, it feels different and unique. That's a really fun group to play with.
Well, be sure to check them out, guys. And Austin, I just want to thank you for your time and sharing your insights with us, and can't wait to hear what you have coming out.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Hi, guys.